Subscribe now for a chance to win a $20 Amazon gift card at the end of the month. All you gotta do is subscribe and comment on the video in the card above. Plus, subscribing notifies you of new scary stories the moment they're released. Whether you hide behind the Great Wall of China or within the symmetry of the Taj Mahal, these monsters will still find you. This world is a strange one. The beauty of hosting a channel like this is the way fans from anywhere can tune in and even send their own stories. It's a beautiful thing that technology has created. We can partake in discussion and wonder together, but we can also tell others of the disturbing things we've seen. Every culture has their monsters and mythical beasts, so hold that thought of an overseas vacation. I'm about to save you some money. Here are 5 allegedly true monster sightings from around the world. But first, that was a joke. Please continue to travel abroad. Learn of and respect each other's cultures. Also, I'm looking for college horror stories. If you've got a creepy experience from your college career, I'd love to hear it. Send your story over at darknessprevails.org. Now, let's take a look at some natives that aren't so friendly. Number 1. Skinwalker in Vietnam, submitted by Jake. This story took place during the Vietnam War. It's a story from my uncle, who was posted in southern Vietnam during the war. My uncle was a sergeant in the army, and he was assigned to Vietnam as a Green Beret. He led a squad whose main objective was to discover and map new locations. There were 6 people in his squad, excluding him, and they had a large jeep to travel in. Their work usually consisted of going to strange and obscure parts of the country and assessing the potential threat each location posed. So as you could imagine, my uncle was almost always on the road. On one such assignment, my uncle's squad was assigned to the foothills of the Annamese Mountains. There was no straight road, just like every other place, so they were forced to use whatever dirt road they could find. They eventually reached the said location and began their work. They spent almost an entire week there and wrapped up on a Saturday evening. But before they could leave, however, they began to hear strange sounds coming from the other side of the hill they were on. Fearing that it might be the enemy, they contacted the head officer for further instructions. They were told to proceed, but with extreme caution. With that, the squad took off into the woods. After driving about 6 more hours, they discovered a fresh set of footprints leading deeper into the woods. They followed the tracks deep into the forest. After a while of driving, they reached a clearing. Judging by the topography of the region surrounding them, they concluded that they were not in proximity of a militant base, so they decided to head out in the morning. They were all very tired and they slept peacefully until daybreak. The next morning, they started making preparations to leave when a squad member spotted a dark silhouette moving across the tree line. The figure moved out of sight shortly after. The squad members reported their sightings to the HO, and once again they instructed to follow. This time, however, my uncle was not prepared to accept orders and devised a clever plan. He proposed that the entire squad be split into 2. The first half would go in search of the silhouette, and the other would stay put. My uncle himself and 3 others went in to search for that thing. After 20 minutes of walking, they came across a small village. Without wasting a second, they made their way down the slope and across an old bridge to reach the village. But it wasn't really a village, just a collection of very old houses long ago abandoned. Still though, they searched the area for signs of life, but they could not find any for the most part. Eventually, they reached a large wall with graffiti on it. Translated, it said, "Get out, go away, do not trouble us." They made their way to the other side through an opening in the wall. There, they discovered a large meadow, and at the edge of the slope they were on stood a large dog-like creature standing on its hind limbs. They were shocked and absolutely horrified. They tried to maintain absolute silence and did not utter a single word. The creature must have sensed their presence as it turned around. It stared at them. It had large white eyes and a very muscular build. My uncle was paralyzed with fear. He wanted to reach out for his gun, but he was frozen. The beast seemed to be holding something or someone. Fearing the worst, my uncle gave the order, "Run!" And in a matter of seconds, all 4 of them were running faster than ever. They could hear the thumping of footsteps behind them. My uncle immediately knew the creature was giving chase. In a matter of minutes, they got to the bridge and hastily crossed it without a second thought. My uncle turned back at that time to see if they were still being followed, and what he saw next still haunts him to this day. The description of the creature in his own words are as follows. That thing, it had to be at least 7 feet tall. Its muscles were like a bodybuilder's, and its face was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. The face was horribly twisted and contorted, but it strangely resembled a dog's head. It was scanning the bridge with those evil eyes, prepared to jump any time, and without a word, I pulled out my gun and shot the darn thing. I swear I must have emptied half my magazine into it. It let out an ear-splitting screech. The noise was so human and inhuman at the same time, I simply couldn't comprehend it. The bullets must have worked though, for the thing stopped and squealed in pain. I jumped at the opportunity and ran as fast as my legs could carry me. Soon my uncle was back at the clearing. His squad members were anxiously waiting for him in the Jeep. He jumped in and they drove off as fast as they possibly could. For the next 8 hours, there was silence. Absolute silence. No one tried breaking it. Eventually, they were back on the main road, and they reached their base a short while later. Later on, my uncle was told to make his report. He included everything he saw. He did not conceal a single detail, no matter how crazy it sounded. When his report was being verified, he was questioned about his encounter, and strangely enough, the head officer seemed to believe him. He said himself that a battalion of soldiers had gone missing around that region, and the true purpose of their assignment was to find out what happened. Those soldiers were never found. Oddly enough still, they would be labeled as killed in action instead of missing, as if the HO knew something he didn't. During his remaining time in the war, my uncle was promoted to head officer, and eventually the war was over. He returned to America almost a month after this incident. Although he retired a few years ago, my uncle has been visiting Native American shamans lately, and that's around the time he shared this story with me. Though it was in Vietnam, he believes what he saw that day was some form of a skinwalker. Number 2. The Thing in the Caves. Submitted by Emma. I'm not really sure where to begin with this story, but here goes nothing. I'm a 21-year-old girl living in a part of England known as the Black Country. It's called this as it has a large history of mining, although all these mines have now been closed for a very long time. I often walk my dog, a Chihuahua, through the fields and woods near my house. The event I'm writing about happened just last month, but I can still remember it as clearly as if it just happened. It was around midday, and it became time for me to take my dog Lady for a walk. As we're walking through a small woods behind my house, scattered with rubbish and unwanted belongings, my dog often ventures through the bushes and trees. As she's so small, this is no problem for her, but I usually have to find another way around. As we were walking along a stream, I realized I hadn't seen her for a while, so I start looking in every small place she could be. After about 10 minutes, I really start to panic as I can't find her, so I end up running through the stream instead of shuffling around the edges of it. When I do find her, she's standing straight up, stiff, with all her fur on end, staring intently at what looks like a dent in the thick foliage. Glancing at where she's looking, I see a quick glimpse of what looks like reflective dog's eyes. Excited that she might have found a foxhole. A bit strange, I know, but I'm an animal lover, and I've always wanted to see a fox, especially a fox cub, so I got a bit closer to get a better look at it. As I got closer to the parting in the thick weaved bushes to look into the hole, I turn on the torch on my phone, kneel down, and I notice quickly that it's a lot bigger than I first realized. The entrance was just a hole into the roof of a cavernous area. This is when my dog started to whimper and pull on my trousers, something I've never seen her do before. I turned to look at her, and I heard what sounded like long nails on laminate flooring, a very rapid tapping noise. When I turned back, I am face to face with terror itself. Hanging off of the ceiling like a freaking bat is what looks like a person. But it's all wrong. Whatever it is stick thin, but its body and limbs are too long. it has an additional set of arms coming from its mid-torso, which apparently it was using to hang from the ceiling. But the worst part was its eyes. It had no eyelids. Its eyes were like white swirling marbles that seemed to see right into my soul. Then it looked at me, and as it stared, it seemed to cock its head like a dog when it's curious. I was frozen, filled with fear, and I could not move. Thankfully, a sharp bite to my leg from my dog snapped me back into reality. I barely remember the sprint back. All I remember is grabbing my dog and sprinting back downstream, then hearing what sounded like a cross between wheels skidding and nails going down a chalkboard. I spent the rest of my night shivering, cuddled up to my dog, watching cartoons to try and calm myself down. I have so many questions. What was that thing? Does it have anything to do with the mines that run beneath the Black Country? Does it stick to the caves, or was that small entrance proof that it's ventured out? If anybody has any similar experiences or knows someone who has, or heck, has even heard a fairy tale of something like this, I would love to hear it, because after all this searching on the internet, I'm struggling to find anything even similar to what I've seen. Number 3. Shrieking Creature in Knoydart. Submitted by Green Goose. This story takes place back in 2014, in late March. I was 17 years old. My uncle had been planning to take one of my friends and I to an area in Scotland called Knoydart. We'd be there a few days to climb some mountains and camp out. Knoydart is arguably the most remote place in the mainland United Kingdom, and my uncle was taking us there at my request, as I am an avid hill walker and love the outdoors. My friend, who I'll call Fred instead of his actual name, had asked to come along with us when I told him about the remoteness of the area and how creepy it would be, especially because there would be no lights of any kind. He liked the outdoors as much as I did, so he loved the sound of it. And my uncle has done about half of the Munros, which are the top 282 tallest mountains in Scotland, and is really proficient at mountaineering and hill walking. It was quite a pleasant day when we set off on our trek. It would have been about 15 degrees Celsius, and there was a cool breeze in the air. We left our car at a place called Glenfinnan, which was about 15 miles away from our planned destination, Inverie. As the crow flies, however, we were taking a more arduous route across a Munro called Mian Boida. The day went well. We covered some good distance, got amazing views from the hills, and even saw a golden eagle, which are quite rare. It began to get dark, but we still had a ways to go before we got to our planned camping spot. So we pressed on, even as darkness began to fall. Now this is where it gets weird. We were just coming down a steep glen when my uncle has to go for a number 1. There was a small forest at the foot of the glen, so he went on ahead while Fred and I stayed back. It was getting difficult to see now, so we both took our head torches out of our rucksacks and put them on. Just as we were doing this, we heard a loud shriek pierce the silence that had surrounded us. Okay, what in God's name was that? I murmured in a confused voice. It came from those crags, my friend stammered. He was spooked. He had never been this far out in the wilderness before, and as a result, he had never had to deal with having his mind play tricks on him. I didn't want to scare him, but I genuinely had no clue what the heck made that noise. It could have just been an eagle, I said, trying to reassure him, but completely failing to convince the guy. He shot me a look of disbelief. Eagle? No way was that an eagle, bud. I knew he was right, so when my uncle got back, we told him about it, and he suggested that maybe we were trying to reintroduce wild boar into Scotland. I couldn't decide if I was happy that we had a potential answer, or scared because there were boar running wild out there. Either way, we had to set up camp. We got the camp set up in a small clump of trees, and we ate some boil-in-the-bag food. We then got into our tents and got to sleep. The eerie shriek from the crags had all but left my mind as I drifted into unconsciousness. At roughly 1 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of branches snapping. This on its own was not enough to make me feel scared or anything, because, as I said, I was an avid hill walker, and I've had deer come right up to my tent before in the night. I usually find the sounds of wildlife relaxing. Whatever it was outside began scratching on what must have been a tree. There was something off about this. It couldn't have been a deer, because deer don't have claws, and it did not sound like a male scratching his antlers. Maybe a fox or a wildcat. Maybe, I thought to myself. The scratching sound persisted, and I decided to shine a light on whatever it was. And then I remembered the shriek from the crags, and I froze. What if it was a boar? Or worse, I ridiculed myself for being spooked by the noise. So I grabbed my torch, and I began to unzip my tent. To this day, I wish I hadn't felt so bold that night. I was faced with complete darkness outside my tent. The scratching was coming from my left. I pointed my torch in that direction and turned it on. I stopped dead. Standing before me was no fox or wildcat, not even a boar. Instead, there was this creature. Its skin was this decaying gray color, and it was completely lacking of any hair. It was hunched in an unnatural position at the base of a tree, just scratching. It looked to be about 1 meter tall from what I could see of its cadaverous-looking body. As soon as the light hit it, though, the thing stopped scratching. It turned to face me, and I choked a scream when I saw its face. Its eyes were a glazed-over milky color. It had no nose that I could see, and it had a thin line where its mouth was. For a couple of seconds, which felt like an eternity, the thing just stared at me, and then its mouth opened, and it belted out this piercing shriek, almost identical to the one Fred and I had heard from the crags. It took one last look at me before running off into the darkness at an unnatural speed. Shortly after, my uncle and Fred ran out of their tents and demanded to know what I saw. I couldn't speak. I'd been that badly scared. I tried to tell them, and my uncle, being the towering pillar of logic that he was, suggested that I had a night terror or something of the sort. Fred, however, believed every word I said. The next day, we cut our walk short and hightailed it into Inverie, where we got a boat to a train station so we could get back by car. We asked a few locals if they had heard anything strange, and a couple had heard similar noises at night, but they too believed that they were being made by boar or elk being reintroduced. I'm posting this experience because even I can't be certain of what I saw, if it even was 100% real. It was dark outside. It was eerie too, and I could have been thinking about the crag shriek as I drifted off. After all, I do have a vivid imagination. I just wanted to share this and perhaps see what others think. Regardless, the wilderness can be scary and a sometimes terrifying place. The only real question, though, is it all in the imagination, or are there truly other things to fear out there, other than our own minds? Number 4. Ocracoke Mystery. Submitted by Xavier. This happened a few years ago. I was with my family on a vacation to Ocracoke, North Carolina. It's an island, and this island was more remote compared to the other islands at least. We went there right after a small hurricane hit the Outer Banks, which included the island. It was dark and gloomy looking, and partially raining on and off here and there, but we took a ferry to the island. The trip on the ferry was extraordinary because I have never done anything like it before. But eventually, after we arrived and looked at the small town, we went out for some lunch and decided to go to Ocracoke National Campground. After this experience, though, I never want to go to the ocean at night. That night, we got our camp set up, and we went out for a swim, but we were not allowed to go far because the waves were heavily affected by the hurricane that occurred a few days before. And when I saw those waves, they were huge and rough. We got bored of the ocean and soon began to search for seashells. But we saw a crab, and my 6-year-old brother and I went after it like normal wild boys. When we caught that sucker, the crab was bright white with bright yellow on its legs. We were wondering what species it was, so we went ahead and asked the ranger at the front of the campground. He told us it was a ghost crab, and he said they mainly come out at night. Later, we had hot dogs and sat by the fire. Then we got ready for bed. Alone, I decided to go out for one last look at the ocean after everyone went to bed. It must have been 12:50 in the morning. I walked the ocean, the stars were bright and the moon was bright as well. I could see about 15 feet in front of me, and the shining water. Ghost crabs were everywhere. I hate to admit it, but I accidentally stepped on a few. Trying to avoid these crabs and walk along the shore, I suddenly saw it. This crocodile, human-looking thing. I was frozen in place. I do not think it heard me because of the crashing waves, but the image of it has been etched into my mind. It was crouching, picking up crabs and eating them, stuffing its face. It was about 5 or 6 feet tall, running back into the ocean after I let out a squeal. I can almost explain it like a baby Godzilla mixed with a human. It sounds far-fetched, but when it looked at me before it ran into the ocean, all the paranormal stories I've ever read, they just came true in my head. I was very skeptic before. I've heard other people's stories, always thinking that they were just making it up, but this one, very quick and very scary experience confirmed it all to me. I ran back to the campsite, crying all the way. I laid down in my tent, and I never went to sleep. I just lay there frozen until finally I heard other members of my family begin to get up. Soon I felt safe to get up myself. Then we left to home, and I told my dad on the way what I saw. He humored my story, saying that he believed me, but I could tell he really didn't. Number 5. The Screaming Banshee. Submitted by Aaron. I'm from Ireland. I'm 20 years old and about 6'4", and I'm pretty built for my age. This story happened to me when I was first learning to drive at around 17 years old. Now, a few details before we begin. Ireland may be a small country, but there's a lot of open space and woods. I was completely alone in the middle of nowhere when this happened. Now, let's begin. I just got my driving license and I was so happy. I was on top of the world. So I did not yet have a car, but my mom and dad both did. So one night, at about 11, my parents went to bed. Before my dad went upstairs to join my mom, I said I needed to go to my friend Alan's house. From here to there, it's only a 5-minute drive. I was a responsible kid, so my dad let me. I rang Alan, and I asked, "Hey, you up for a drive?" He said, "Sure, I'll be ready in 10. So I drove over to Alan's house, and we set off to the woods near us. Now, the part of Ireland I live in is Laois, about an hour from Dublin. We arrived, and I drive into the middle of the woods. We had a few beers and a few snacks, and had a brilliant time until the mood changed. Everything happened so fast, I began to feel that we were not alone. I tried to start the car, but it cut out. This is a new car, so this was very weird. And the next thing I heard scared me right to the bone. It was a blood-boiling scream. Out of nowhere, I saw this ghostly figure with long hair that covered her face. Alan jumped into the car. He shouted at me to get in. I did not feel scared though. I felt sad. I even began to cry. As fast as it came, it was gone, and I sat there crying and I felt so sad. It was weird. We left the woods, then after a while we fixed the car. I dropped Alan off and I went home, crying all the way. I went to bed, but my parents woke me up and told me that my grandma had died. I was defeated, and I broke down completely. When I remembered what happened the night before, it made sense that it was a banshee, an Irish legend that would come to certain families with certain second names to tell them someone was going to die. I felt sick. Ireland is a lovely country, but what happened that night was very bizarre, and was definitely a banshee. Thank you for listening. Monsters hide in the wild, monsters of different shapes and sizes and locations. But there is something great about that fact. It means humans might share a common enemy. Under our skins of different color, behind our voices of different tongues, we are all human. We are all prey to the creatures that hunt for us. So stop fighting amongst yourselves, respect each other, and band together. Otherwise, you'll be alone when the beasts of the night begin to chew on your flesh. Good night, Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget, you can send us your college horror stories at darknessprevails.org. Thanks.